May 17th, 1979 started out as just your typical ordinary day in May. Except when you look a little bit deeper into that date, one thing in particular stands out. I mean, look at this Wikipedia page of all the things that happened in May of 1979, the entire month. On May 4th, Margaret Thatcher became Britain's first prime minister. Lance Bass of NSYNC was born on that day as well. On May 10th, for the first time in American history, gas costs more than $1 per gallon. And on May 19th, the Phillies unveiled a new uniform that would be worn only one time. The Saturday night special all-burgundy getup that was widely panned and shelved until they brought it back in 2019. But 2 days before that, May 17th, 1979, only one thing of note happens in the entire world, according to Wikipedia. A crazy baseball game between the Phillies and the Cubs. It remains, to this day, one of the wildest games in MLB history. You need to read the box score a dozen times to truly understand the insanity of this one. The winds were blowing out to left field at more than 18 miles per hour at Wrigley. Dave Kingman of the Cubs hit 3 home runs. He outdueled Mike Schmidt, who hit 2 homers, but Schmidt had the last laugh as he hit one off of Bruce Sutter, Hall of Fame closer, in the 10th inning. That was the game winner. 45 years ago, the Phillies and Cubs totaled 127 plate appearances, 50 hits, 18 walks, and 11 home runs as the Phillies won 23-22 in 10 innings. So now that 45 years have passed since that incredible game, we look back at it with the help of the man who literally wrote the book on it. My name is Pat Gallen. This is a Gallen of Questions, and we speak with the author of 10 Innings at Wrigley. His name is Kevin Cook. So I'm here with Kevin Cook. The book is right here, 10 Innings at Wrigley. We're 45 years removed from that crazy day. Kevin, my favorite quote from the day is, the craziest game ever, and then the second inning started. The line scores sort of read like phone numbers, and there was like 14,000 people in the stands, almost 15,000, but watching the replay, it seemed like more. But my first question to you, Kevin, is what compelled you to write a book about this particular game?
Well, I remember the game. I wasn't at the game, but knew people who were, and it was just one of those remarkable things that could only have happened at Wrigley Field with the wind blowing out a gale. And looking back at it, realizing that it was a remarkable game at a remarkable time in the modern history of the game, it hit me that this is one of the best cast of characters that you ever had. You've got Dave Kingman and Bill Buckner on one side. You've got Pete Rose and Mike Schmidt and Larry Bowa and Tug McGraw on the other side, Hall of Famers. And with Kingman especially, on a day like that, if he hits a ball at a 40-degree angle, it may still be going. I mean, my pop was a minor league pitcher who once gave up a home run to the Reds' great Ted Kluszewski that he always swore remained in the air forever. And I think a couple of Kingman's balls did that. But I actually tracked down the very spot that one of Kingman's home runs wound up. And, it's 4 houses down beyond Waveland Avenue. So you can't beat that. You've got tempestuous Larry Bowa playing shortstop, and he says, we got enough runs for you. Well, no, not after 13 runs in the first inning.
How long did it take you to write the book?
It was a year and a half, and good trips back to Wrigley Field. I mean, I was not at Wrigley Field as early as 79, but shortly thereafter. And it's amazing how it has changed. I think so many ballparks, Wrigleyville is now like a theme park devoted to the Cubs. And in those days, you walk up, get off the L, walk up here, get a seat, 5 minutes before the national anthem is just beginning. You walk in, the place is only half full, and you see something that people still remember today. I mean, there are Cubs fans and Phillies fans who remember where they were. It was also remarkable that cable TV is just going to really help save the modern game. The big leagues were losing ground to the NFL and the NBA. But if you were a Cub fan, you can watch every game on the new Superstation. and that changed things a lot too.
And Wrigley Field, as you mentioned, has changed dramatically. I like that. It does seem like a theme park out there. I've been out there a few times over the years, and each time it seems like there's more and more surrounding the ballpark. But going back and watching some of the clips, the highlights of that game, there's just nothing around. I mean, Kingman literally hits one down the street, and it essentially just keeps bouncing towards the homes that are out there. It certainly doesn't look that way
Yes, it
anymore.
might have hit the mailman.
Pretty amazing to see just how barren everything was at Wrigley in and around the stadium. I mean, I happen to, as a baseball purist, it's fun to watch that, what it looked like in 1979. But I think I'd much rather prefer what we have around there now. Maybe that's just the youth in me, like looking for a theme park type thing.
It's a great setting for a ball game today. I mean, it's one of those immortal ballparks. And as you say, it was so different at that time. At one point, the big distraction for the fans in the bleachers was the garbage truck going down Waveland Avenue behind the left field bleachers that caught on fire. Yep. And so the guys all pour out of the fire station, which was right there. And that was yet another sidelight. I guess it was better than the bratwurst races that we see at Milwaukee and some other entertainments during the game. That was a real north side of Chicago entertainment that day.
And that sort of speaks, a garbage truck catching fire sort of speaks to the two franchises as a whole to that point, right? Like, they were essentially the Cubs we know were cursed for so long. The Phillies, though, sort of underrated as far as how cursed they had been to that point. 1950, a lot of people around here were young, but may remember the Whiz Kids team that fell short. And then you had the 70s teams that couldn't get over the hump until the following year from this game, 1980. And you sort of set it up beautifully, I thought, writing about where these two franchises had been to the point of this game.
I think that's right. And the Cubs have a long way to go, and they're going to finish last again and again. And the Phillies are on the brink of a championship, of making a new sort of history.
Of all of the strange things that happened in this game, what do you think stands out to you the most going back and learning all about this game?
Well, there's so many. Certainly the power display, and some of it was only moderate power. It's a fly ball to shallow left center field. He backpedals, Kingman backpedals. He looks up, and it's in the seats. It was also, it's still the only game in history in which one team's catcher and pitcher both homered before they ever came to the plate. And there were not only all of that, but the sun is going down toward the end of the game, and there are no lights yet at Wrigley Field. So it's in the gloaming late in the game. You've also got two pitchers. Donnie Moore has not really learned the split finger quote unquote fastball, really a changeup. But Bruce Sutter had come to master it, and he comes in, a Hall of Famer against a Hall of Famer toward the end of the game, not to give the ending away to those who don't know when they read the book, but it does make for quite a matchup toward the very finale.
I think what maybe stands out to me, and this is how much the game has changed over the years, only 11 total strikeouts in this game. If this were now and there were 127 plate appearances or whatever there was in this game, there'd be 63 strikeouts. But the game was just so much different back then, such a contact hitter sport. And a lot of the players in the game, Bowa, Maddox, Boone to an extent, even for the Cubs, Bill Buckner was always known as a great contact hitter.
Yes.
It was just a completely different game, and really not all that long ago.
True, and that's how fast things change. I think the era of analytics was just beginning at that time. Across town, Tony La Russa, the young manager of the White Sox, is ridiculed because he's got computer printouts. Oh, you big egghead, you're going to bring those. Can't you tell whether a guy is hot or not? And as you said, Pete Rose, of course, is another contact hitter. I thought it was fascinating to look back and see. I mean, Dave Kingman was notorious for being a strikeout artist, and ridiculed. He was sent from team to team. This guy is just going to strike out, and certainly no defensive wizard. But you look back at the stats, and his strikeout totals today would be nowhere near the top. And you've got Schwarber, for instance, a guy who's
just going to mention that, yeah,
played for a couple of teams, who strikes out far more than Kingman ever did. But if you hit home runs like he does, it works. And I think one subtext to some degree is that a guy like Dave Kingman was underrated. A lot of these players were incredibly famous and beloved. Bill Buckner winds up being remembered for one thing in his whole career when he actually had a very fine career. Mm-hmm. But you make an error in a World Series, that's going to stick with you for a long time. Kingman is remembered negatively, and I think there are some things to take away from this particular game to tell us about the game in '79. There were good things to appreciate.
Yeah, and it's before stats, you mentioning Kingman. He'd be celebrated, obviously, in today's game. But going back and watching the game, I and hearing them, Harry and Whitey here in Philly, who I grew up listening to in Philadelphia, but great then voice. Trying to calculate in real time, like the batting averages of the players on the fly is pretty, that's a throwback right there.
Yeah, so he might be hitting near 300 by now. Of course, now we know down to the 8th decimal place by the time the ball lands in the outfield.
The personalities in this game, some of whom you mentioned, or I guess you might say like lack thereof, really stood out in your book because it almost seems to me like these are like ornery, old-time ball players. You had Mike Schmidt, who consistently clashed with Phillies fans. Mm-hmm. Rick Reed was an interesting guy. Kingman, Buckner, they didn't seem to get along. They didn't like each other. Bowa, funny, still is, because I actually talked to him about this game last week, and he was reminiscing about the stadium and the wind blowing out and how he knew it was going to be crazy. He's a funny guy, but certainly could be intense. Pete Rose could be intense. A lot of personalities in this game.
Certainly right, and Rick Reed you mentioned was there was one of the beat writers that I spoke to who said that this is just a guy who didn't like anyone. That can help you on the mound sometime if you're an ornery type of personality. I also talked to John Schulian, a tremendous columnist at that time for the Chicago Sun-Times, who talked about the Cubs manager, who was a disciple of Leo DeRocher, Herman Franks. And he said, Herman Franks would sit in his office in the clubhouse. He'd have his feet up. He'd be smoking cigarette with one hand and eating chocolate donuts with the other, refusing to answer questions. Schulian said Herman Franks invented grumpiness. Then in the other dugout, Danny Ozark is a very genial, completely different sort of personality for the Phillies. Of course, neither one of them is going to last the season because things are changing for both teams in a good way for the Phillies.
Yeah, and Dave Kingman, I've always been the kind of guy who, I grew up loving the home run hitters. I was a huge Mark McGwire fan. Mm-hmm. It was, even in his early days in Oakland, I thought it was so cool that he mashed in the way that he did when a lot of guys just didn't hit home runs. And then a little bit later on, obviously, the chase in 98 with he and Sosa, and the numbers go through the roof. But I've always found the home run to be it's like a sexy part of the game, right? Now, going back to Dave Kingman, in another world, maybe Dave Kingman is a different kind of personality, but he came off, I guess, through the book, and he was out of the majors by the time I was a little kid, but he just seemed like he wasn't a fan of other people either.
True, and he wasn't a baseball fan. And Buckner was similar. These guys were kind of puzzled by fandom. And there is a whole stripe of athlete that's like that, doesn't really understand that some of us are not good enough to be big league ball players. So we live that vicariously through them, but they don't like it. Kingman is certainly one who didn't think that his job should entail talking to these wretches of the press. And then, of course, he did some awful things. He did a terrible thing to a female reporter, sending her a dead rat, which he thought was kind of funny. I think even worse than Kingman's tendency to strike out might have been his lack of a sense of humor. But he could hit home runs. He hit the ball a long way.
Certainly could. For the Phillies, Pete Rose played such an integral part in them winning the World Series in 1980, but in '79 they weren't quite there yet. And but no matter what the topic, no matter what the book, the story, anything with Pete Rose kind of stands out just because of who he was.
He's a vivid character. This is he was actually my little league hero. I grew up in Indiana, so I would run to first base on walks and slide head first and get hurt and not be nearly the athlete that he was. I think he is one of those people, unlike a guy like Kingman, for instance, who dearly loved to play baseball, and also one of those old timers that you can talk to him in recently, as I did, and he remembers counts. He remembers what pitch he's going to get at 2-1 in a particular inning in one of the thousands of games that he played, and whatever else one may think of Pete Rose, he was a great addition to the game in his playing days.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you catching up with me and talking about the book. It was a lot of fun. One of the other great quotes I thought from this game was from Mike Schmidt, and that ball players often say that you can never get enough runs to win in this park, but they always say it sarcastically. After today, they can forget the sarcasm. As you mentioned, this is a game where, my dad remembers the game. He was a teenager at the time. It's just one of those cool, nostalgic days in sports history that stands out, and your book was fantastic. So thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, and it's great fun to watch that. It's wonderful that it's on YouTube. You can queue up an inning or two and go back to that time.
Now, in that wild Phillies-Cubs game on May 17th of 1979, only one man had 5 hits. Legendary Phillies shortstop Larry Bowa. I caught up with the legend to talk about what he remembers from that day.
I remember the wind blowing out extremely hard.
Yeah.
The other thing I remember is Randy Lerch was our starting pitcher, and he had 3 outings before ours, and we didn't get him any runs. It was like 2-1 he lost, 3-2, and a third game we didn't score any runs. And the quote in the paper was, "It'd be nice if I get some runs." So, of course, if you're an everyday player, you put that in the back of your mind. So we get 6 in the first inning, and he had a home run in the first inning.
He did, yes, he did.
So we're running out, and I said, "Is that enough for you?" Sarcastically, and he just gave me that look, and he didn't get out of the first inning.
No, he didn't.
No.
He got a third of an inning, I think.
It's unbelievable. And then Tuck went in,
Yeah.
and he couldn't get anybody out either. It was one of those games where when you're sitting on the bench, you get 6 right away. You're saying, even though it's Wrigley, you don't feel real comfortable. You feel pretty good.
Sure.
The more we put on, the more they came back. I know Schmidt hit 2 home runs that game, and I think Kingman hit 3.
Kingman hit 3.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason I know, because obviously it was a high-scoring game, but I got 5 for 8. So
You never forget that one.
No, I never forget that.
Did you know before the game started that it was going to be kind of a strange one?
Oh yeah, the flag
You knew,
was
yeah.
the flag. It looked like a hurricane came in the Wrigley, and when it gets hot and humid and that wind's blowing out, you never have enough runs. I don't care how good your offense is or how bad your offense is, you're putting runs on the board, and they kept matching us, man. I'll give them credit. They're down 6 runs in the first. Most of the time, guys go, "Oh, well, we'll try to hang in there and get them tomorrow," but they kept battling. And Bill Buckner was on that team. He was a good hitter.
Yeah.
It was one of those that you never forget, believe me.
Was it true that you were talking smack? Was it either was it Buckner or was it Kingman that you were talking smack to? In the book, it made it sound like you were like, we're up 6, match us, come on.
I told Buckner that because him and Buck and I, after that, I ended up going over there and playing with him, but I've known him for a long time. And on the first hit I got, I said, and we were scoring runs, we batted around, and I looked at him, I go, what do you got now? And he goes, playing here, there's no lights, and you see that flag blowing out? I said, yeah, I know. I said, I better keep my mouth shut. And the baseball gods got me to a certain extent.
Sure did.
Because we were up, and then the next thing I knew, they tied the game real quick.
Can you believe it's been 45 years since that game?
I know, that's a long time. The fact that there were no lights there.
Yeah.
And we had good teams in the from mid 70 on down through 80. We had some real good teams. And the ironic thing about that is we were sitting on the bench before the game, and Schmitty was talking to, I think it was Danny Ozark, our manager, and he was struggling a little bit. And he said, hey, Danny, don't be afraid to put a hit and run on. And I'm sitting there, I'm getting my helmet ready because I was hitting. And I said, what'd you just say? He said, I want to put a hit and run on. I said, Schmitty, you see that flag out there? You could hit the ball at the end of the bat in your strength. And he goes, yeah, but it makes me stay on the ball. But I'll never forget that because he was struggling, but he ended up hitting 2 home runs. And we didn't put a hit and run on, needless to say.
No, you didn't need to. Incredible stuff. Larry, appreciate you looking back. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.